obviously has been chipped away, not least by Iran. And now, obviously, we have these, obviously the crisis and demonstrations and repression in Bahrain, where a lot of people think that this is a kind of a focal point for, skullduggery between the Iranians and the Saudis and so on. Can you talk about a little bit about how you see, is there a sectarian issue that we should be concerned about here?
Oh, definitely. The sectarian issue is here in London on our university campuses. There are two regional powers that are competing. And what has happened is that the Saudi religious tradition that we call Wahhabism here is extremely sectarian. One thing to remember about this tradition, that its first target was other Muslims rather than infidels or so-called infidels. Its first wars with other Muslims, such as, for example, the Shia, the Ismailis, the Sufis in the Hijaz. Not everybody is a Wahhabi in Saudi Arabia, but because of this oil wealth that is spent on this religious tradition and the institutions that are actually embodying it, we find that it is spreading. So what has happened in Bahrain is that Saudi Arabia has moved in to guarantee the rule of the Al Khalifa in Bahrain and give a message to its own Shia population on the other side of the bridge that if you do anything like, for example, demanding your basic rights, because this is a community that is a minority deprived of some basic human rights. And therefore, this lesson was given to the Shia. But above all, the reason why Saudi Arabia is involved in Bahrain and heavily involved is to give a message to the majority Sunni population of Saudi Arabia that is beginning to feel the heavy hand of the princes. And therefore, it wanted to scare them that it will not allow any kind of uprising, but also, most importantly, by taking the sectarian stand, it is saying to the majority that we defend the Sunnis, and therefore you have to forget your internal problems and conflicts and support the Al Saud leadership.
I was trying to think of a very clever link between the Al Saudi and Wahhabi tradition and our own royal family and the Church of England, but somehow it doesn't quite cohere. Nonetheless, we can move from a monarchy in trouble to a monarchy that is not in trouble at all. Peter Whittle, you've written a robust defence of the monarchy, called it Monarchy Matters.
Yes.
And you're interested in the monarchy. It's very interesting that where people get their first connection. But yours came very, very early when you were a child.
That's right. I mean, it was an interest in history and all of those great sort of BBC programmes like The Six Wives of Henry VIII and all of that. And sort of parents who took one, therefore, round to see castles and palaces and all the rest of it. And from that, I sort of became quite interested in the present-day incumbents. What the point of the book really is that, which is written very much with the Diamond Jubilee in mind, is that we live, it seems to me, in largely an anti-monarchist atmosphere on the whole, I'd say. But what is interesting is that atmosphere is to a great extent created or is maintained, if you like, by our elites, who generally speaking have been much more Republican than the majority of people. And if you look at the monarchy, which, okay, might be successful now, but 15 years ago, if we'd been having this conversation, I think people would have been thinking it was on its way out. Throughout the whole of the past 40 years, the amount of people who support the institution, that's not the Queen, but the actual institution, stayed almost static. This is extraordinary. I think Maury has said that, in fact, it's the most steady thing that they've actually ever tracked, of any subject they've polled on. It's usually around about 70% people who want the institution to continue, and usually it never gets above about 19–20% of people who want a republic.
Let me interrogate you about this Republican atmosphere you talk about, because there are certainly parts of the establishment, really, which could be called that a bit, but most newspapers would be pretty monarchist and pretty loyal.
I'm not so sure about that actually, more, Andrew. I think that, if you're talking about like Middle England and the Daily Mail, that's sort of quite caustic now.
Well, even the Times, which is meant to be under a Republican proprietor, seems to me to be pretty robustly monarchist, isn't it?
No, I think that the Telegraph stands out probably as sort of, the real bastion, if you like, of royalism. But on the whole, I think that there is a kind of irony in the way in which it's treated now. But more importantly, maybe than the press coverage, is that we've got a tradition in this country which Orwell, talks about, which is generally of shame about our national character. I mean, he famously said the English intellectual is unique in the world in that he'd rather steal from, as he put it, a poor box than stand for God Save the Queen, or God Save the King then, as it was then. But he also went on to say, and he was far from being an imperialist or a monarchist, that it was probably the best system, this was during the war, in that we couldn't probably therefore have a Hitler or Stalin coming to power here. So what I would say is that right up to the present, and indeed, you know, to people who are making their voices felt before the royal wedding, there is this general sort of attack on the institution, a sort of sense in which people have a kind of false consciousness in supporting it.
So people, you think there's a layer of irony and deprecation there that you have to.
Yes, and also condescension. I mean, Will Self, for example, particularly, you know, just recently in
Prospect magazine has done a big thing on the monarchy.
Basically, the tone. He says the same thing. The tone of criticism of the monarchy is basically that we should grow up. Now, you know, here we are. We've been discussing great civilizations, and you know, and we have been one of those, and we've shaped the modern world. I don't quite know how else you show how grown up you are, other than shaping the modern world. But somehow this is the tone of much of the criticism is that somehow or other it keeps us infantile, and I would strongly disagree on it.
Isn't the biggest problem in many ways that the British monarchy has faced is the changing nature of the media, in the sense that much more intrusive, much cheekier, much more aggressive, although you go back to the 1840s and it was just all of those things, but in modern times it's become much harder, and therefore this notion of the monarchy as the ideal family, representing the national family, has been harder to maintain simply because of the number of lenses and microphones and, you know, commentators and bloggers.
And the number of divorces, of course, in the royal family. I don't think it's actually, I think the crucial thing is when it comes to the media, is this idea of daylight. And Walter Bagehot, you know, famously said you mustn't let daylight in upon magic. Well, I think
more like a searchlight.
Actually, it is a searchlight, but in fact, I think that it shows that the monarchy actually doesn't need magic, or maybe it was the wrong term, magic, if you like, because it has survived. And I think people, you know, they have more of an idea. They don't need smoke and mirrors. I think they can want a monarchy without feeling that it has to be mysterious.
Neil Ferguson.
I thought there was a great connection that you could have made, Andrew. I think it's only today that Prince Andrew's trip to the Saudi economy has been cancelled owing to some difficulties he's been experiencing, not only at the hands of our media. I mean, the Daily Mail, our newspaper I despise above all others, has been waging a campaign against him, and I'm sure there's no smoke without fire in that case, but nevertheless I think it illustrates the point that's being made here, that you can't really count on Middle England anymore. You can't really count on the mid-market press. And I think the critical issue here is there is just a gap between our ideal of the monarchy, King's Speech ideal. I mean, I was at a cinema where there wasn't a dry eye in the house at the end of that movie, and the reality which appears in the papers on a regular basis. And my sense is that over time, particularly after Her Majesty has gone, perish the thought, but it must happen, it's going to be difficult. My sense is it's not really as solid as you hope, and that the expectation that you raise in your book, that we're all going to have wonderful street parties for the Diamond Jubilee, I think this expectation may turn out to be somewhat out of date.
It's not. I don't think I'm encouraging that to happen. I think that you know, you can't make people have street parties and celebrate if they don't want to. But I mean, you should be able to maybe help them if they want to. I disagree with you actually, Neil. Here, when people are asked, you know, do you want the monarchy to continue, it always stays roughly the same amount, which I've already mentioned. If you ask them, do you think it will be here in 50 years, then that figure goes right down, simply because it's quite understandable. If you keep hearing it knocked all the time, you must sort of think it's on its way out.
But it could collapse really suddenly, and that's my central point. Something can be fine until it's not fine, and after the Queen it would be quite easy, I think, for the royal family to lose legitimacy very, very quickly.
Madawi al-Rashid.
It's very difficult to imagine Britain without a monarchy, I think. I think it is the ideal, the dream monarchy. It is pomp without power. And this is extremely important.
I was interested that you said, and you justified, of course, you say that the monarchy can play a unifying role in the United Kingdom at a time of great political fragmentation. Isn't the contradiction that actually the fragmentation is taking place actually undermines the tenets and the sort of the structure of the monarchy, unless something really does change in the way in which the monarchy reaches out to the people.
I think it's actually got to take a much more active role there. It's been quite passive during this development, where we have actually started to. There's been a sort of social breakdown, a fragmentation. I think that the chances of the monarchy unifying really rely on it taking a much more active role, if you like, sort of in the teaching of history, something as small as that. Or
This is interesting, because people always say Prince Charles, the problem is he's got too many strong views, he's a passionate man with, powerful opinions, and he will hate being king because he'll have to shut up. But you're suggesting possibly that there are areas where he wouldn't need to shut up.
Well, no, I'm not saying. I think that I don't agree with Prince Charles on many of the things he says. I would have thought that probably he would understand the position enough not to do anything once he becomes king. But I say in the book, in fact, that the reason that people might feel rather ambivalent about Charles is not really to do with his love of organic food or farming or anything. It's much more to do with his history and his marriages and all of that sort of stuff.
The biggest danger for Charles is that he tries to reform the monarchy. That's the Charles I mistake, and it's the Louis XVI mistake.
Well, poor man, he's going to have to curb his eloquence and his opinions and not speak very much at all when that happens. Something I think all my guests today would loathe if it happened to them. Peter Whittle's Monarchy Matters and Neil Ferguson's Civilization, The West of the Rest are published this month. Neil's television series on Channel 4 continues on Sunday. Madawi al-Rashid's History of Saudi Arabia has been updated, and George Magnus will be giving a talk entitled Can the Economies of Asia Flourish in the Post-Crisis World at Asia House in London tomorrow night.